The time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
We shall destroy Israel and its inhabitants.
I just started this job 10 months ago. Now you want me to plan an entire war in 2 days?
Yes?
Take the old city and be done with it.
No more bloodshed.
We should go in now. And what is your great strategy for that?
To be right here, Mota, and not to go in. History will never forgive you.
Jerusalem has never been conquered from the east. Not since King David's time.
So it will be the second time. And the last one.
Enter the old city immediately and capture it.
55th Paratrooper Brigade, move toward the Lion's Gate. It was a merciless battle, but you didn't complain. For you, it was enough to drive forward and to conquer. Jerusalem is yours, forever.
They're quite dramatic scenes, aren't they? They're snapshots from the 1967 Seven-Day War. And of course, as we know, Jerusalem has always been a city of conflict, and it continues to be so. The Six-Day War was very significant because a lot of political scientists look at it and they say it actually changed the whole political structure of the Middle East. And of course, the outcome was quite astounding militarily. So Jerusalem, which we want our focus to be on this afternoon, has always been quite a controversial city. It's a unique city. There are competing claims of faith. The three major faiths of today's world are centred in Jerusalem. And it's been a city, we guess, or we could say, of tragedy and tension. And our question, and maybe it's your question, of course, for many interested friends, they look at today's world, they look particularly at the Middle East, and this is a question about the Jewish people. How come they survive? When we look back at their history and we see the conflict that they've been through, people look at them, and there's a sort of a uniqueness about the nation of Israel that triggers the question, is there something more important about the city of Jerusalem and the Jewish people, the nation of Israel? How is it that great empires have come and gone? They've persecuted the Jewish people. They haven't survived, but the Jewish people have. And why is the problem of the Middle East so insoluble for political people today? Nations are trying to reconfigure the whole of that Middle East and find some solution. They haven't found it. Why is that? Is there something important about it? So this afternoon we want to have a look at, particularly focus on the Six-Day War. It's June, 50 years ago, a jubilee. The soldiers of the 55th Brigade entered Jerusalem and reunified it, and that was not just for them a military victory, but for Bible students, it was a fulfilment of a prophecy that was given 2,000 years ago. So, quite inspiring, quite astounding. So that's what we want to have a look at this afternoon. We're going to do it in three portions. We want to look at some prophecies from the Bible. As I say, not only was it a military miracle, it's a biblical miracle as well, and that's where our emphasis is, because 2,500 years ago, there was a prophecy given that came to pass in 1948 with the establishment of the nation of Israel. So we want to have a look at that as a bit of background. We then want to have a look at reunification. What does it mean from the prophecy of our Lord Jesus Christ? Again, these are Bible prophecies that we've seen come to pass. So they establish the reality of the Bible. And then we want to have a look at the restoration of the nation and the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. So re-establishment, reunification, restoration is our subject for this afternoon. Well, we've got to wind the clock back, I guess, around about 70 years. In 1947, the United Nations met together to discuss this particular problem of Israel in the Middle East. How are they going to solve it? What were they going to do? And they had a slither of territory called Palestine that had to divide up somehow in a reasonably fair way. Well, it was a map maker's nightmare. And in the end, they divided it up, and you can see how difficult this would be. The yellow area here is the proposed Jewish area. This beige colour is the Arab area, and Jerusalem was to be an international area. So, of course, militarily, that was indefensible. When you look at those borders, they're not in straight lines, they're not easy, they're just scattered, fragmented all over the place. And that was the design so that there could be no serious defence by either side. And so in 1948, the British troops left from Haifa as that partitioning went in place. And of course, the Jewish people watched them go. Some of the older men, I guess, would have watched these soldiers hear the tramp of the boots as they left and think, well, this has happened so many times in our history. But as the British left, one of the majors stopped at the house of Mordecai Weingarten, who was one of the senior citizens of Jerusalem, and he gave him one of the keys to the gate, the Zion Gate. And he said, this is a symbol of a transfer of power. The Jewish people have never held Jerusalem. And he said, this is a significant transfer. As we leave, here is the key to the gate of Zion. And that was quite an astounding thing. And as he left, of course, in the background, you could hear the sound of machine guns as they began the fight for this area of Palestine, and particularly the city of Jerusalem. Of course, that machine gun fire was just a re-echo of what had happened down through history. Down through history, of course, there have been many sieges and many captures of the city of Jerusalem, starting right back from the time of David 3,000 years ago. And as you look at those Crusaders, Muslims, the Turks, the Mongols, the Ottomans, of course, countries, empires have come and gone. They've taken control of the city of Jerusalem. Well, Ben-Gurion, of course, in May 1948, made the announcement of the State of Israel, the establishment of that particular entity, and that was, as we said, an amazing fulfilment of a 2,500-year prophecy. And the whole point of this is, the Bible isn't just a book of history, it's not just a book of moral instruction or guidance, it's a book that points to the reality and the existence of God and his control over the nation. So when we see Ben-Gurion stand up and pronounce the State of Israel, that's a fulfilment of significant prophecies to show us that God is alive, real, that things are on track, and that he controls the destiny of nations. So no educated person who looks at the survival of the Jewish people would say that it's anything more than a miraculous survival. And as we step back, that's our question to you. The survival of the Jewish people, is this coincidence? Is it chance? Is it just accidental? Well, not at all. Ben-Gurion made this particular statement as far as the Jewish people was concerned. He said, I don't know of anyone else. I don't know of any people that was exiled from its land, dispersed among the nations of the world, so hated, so persecuted, expelled and slaughtered, 6 million. There was genocide was happening to wipe out the people. But they didn't vanish from history. Why not? They didn't despair or assimilate. They yearned incessantly to return to their own land and believed in the messianic deliverance for 2,000 years, and they returned to the land, as we've been saying, 1948. That's astounding. That is amazing, even from the perspective of people who don't believe the Bible. And he went on to say, although there are many conquerors, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Roman, Arab, Seljuk, Crusaders, Mamelukes, Ottomans and British, people came and went, empires just dispersed them from that particular land. He said this country was never the one and only homeland to any other people than the Jews. There's no other case like that in history, he says, of a people returning to its land after 1,800 years. That is a unique fact. So we've got to deal with that. How do we deal with it? Is it just coincidence or chance, or is there some reality to the Bible? We want to prove this afternoon that the Bible has predicted the course of nations, and particularly the people of Israel are God's witnesses to the reality of the Bible. So here in Isaiah chapter 43, God says, you're my witnesses. That's the whole reason for the continuing existence of the Jewish people. He says, I predicted your deliverance, I declared what you would do, and then I did it. You are my witnesses that I am the only God. So when we step back and we look at the people of Israel and their survival, their miraculous survival, it's not through any military skill that they've had, it's because there's divine providence working behind the scenes to prove that God is a reality. So the nation of Israel stands as a very tangible witness to the reality of God. That's astounding, that's amazing. Well, there's more, because all the major prophets talk about the revival of Israel. Here again in Jeremiah, he says, historically there was an incident when you came out of Egypt, the Red Sea parted open and there was an amazing miracle, you went through the Red Sea. Well, that's going to be forgotten, he says, because it's going to be said, the Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, so their dispersion, their exile throughout the world, He'd driven them all through the world, and I will bring them again into their own land that I gave their fathers. Now, we've got to deal with that verse. How do we deal with it? Because that was written 2,500 years ago. That's amazing, and fulfilled, as we said, in 1948. So we have to deal with the miraculous survival of the Jew, and we can do so from Bible prophecy. Well, not only is it Isaiah, not only is it Jeremiah, but it's also Ezekiel, in a series of chapters, talks about the bringing back of the people of Israel. And here in Ezekiel chapter 34, key phrase there is, I will bring them back into their own land. So you know, before the establishment of the state of Israel, there were options in Uganda, up here in the north, in the Kimberleys, in Australia, but the prophetic word said, I'll bring them back to their own land, fulfilled in 1948. Now you've got to deal with that fact. And again, Ezekiel goes on to talk about taking them out of many nations, bringing them back into their own land. That happened. And you'll dwell in the land that I gave your fathers. So there's people that have come back, and there's a picture of the Exodus. The British tried to stop the Jewish people from returning to their land and put them out onto Cyprus in centres there, camps there. People from Ethiopia as well, and these people are returning to the land. Ezekiel goes on to talk about, and there's a little bit of a parable, you might be aware of it, the story of the revival of dry bones, which speaks of the establishment of the nation. Here in Ezekiel 37, it's the same assurance that God is going to control the movement of nations and bring the Jewish people, the eternal Jew, surviving all the dispersions of history and all the persecutions and attempted genocide, and he's going to bring them in their own land, he says, and I'll make them one nation upon the land in the mountains of Israel. We have to deal with that. And we can only deal with it by accepting Bible prophecy is true, accurate, correct, and God is a living reality. And you'll notice as well here these strange-looking gates. Well, they're the gates that surround the Knesset, and they're a sculptor's interpretation of Ezekiel chapter 37, which talks about the dry bones. People of Israel being dispersed and reconstructed. It's significant that those bones are on the front of the Jewish parliament as a witness themselves to their existence because of God's providence. So I'm going to give you a snapshot now of how this parable of the dry bones. We won't go to it, it's in Ezekiel 37, but here's what Ezekiel says.
2,600 years ago, the prophet Ezekiel was shown a vast valley of dry human bones. God declared that they would come to life, and they did. With a great rattling sound, the bones drew together and were given life. God explained his vision. It would be the Jewish people resurrected as a nation once more. In 1948, the dry bones became the nation of Israel again, just as God foretold.
So that's just a snapshot, a quick look at Ezekiel 37. And Ezekiel saw a great valley, and he says that the bones were very dry. And the reason they were very dry is because Israel had been in dispersion for 2,000 years. But all of a sudden, as Ezekiel goes on to talk about, he sees a reconnection, a human body being formed, and eventually a great army standing up. So the words that he uses are dry bones, a skeleton, a noise, a shaking, sinew, flesh coming on them, skin, breath, and an army. So that's the picture back in Ezekiel chapter 37. So how does that relate to the people of Israel? Well, we've seen just in recent times the fulfilment of this prophecy. Back in AD 70, 2,000 years ago, the people of Israel were distributed and exiled throughout the world. But of course, they've come back and we've seen them established in their own rights as a nation. So this skeletal form, we might say, began back in 1882, where there was a little bit of movement and thought about a creation of the state of Israel. Theodore Herzl, 1897, suggested that within 50 years, the nation of Israel would be established, and quite amazing, that statement came true. Back in 1914, of course, there was a lot of agitation. 1917, Lord Balfour in England declared that, well, there should be a homeland for the Jews. So you can see the framework is being gradually established. And then there was reality put upon it as the League of Nations began to discuss this amongst themselves. 1947, as we've talked about, the petitioning of the nation. Breath was breathed into it, 1948, as the nation was established and proclaimed. And of course, in 1967, well, there was life. They defended their borders and they survived and they were successful. So you can see from that particular prophecy a very vibrant and a very real parable as to how God was going to re-establish the people of Israel back in their land. We see it today. We've got to deal with it. How do we? Well, we recognise that the Bible is true and God is active in political affairs, eventually to bring back the return of his Son and the establishment of his kingdom. Now, I've given you a lot of Old Testament quotes, not just the Old Testament. Jesus talks about the city of Jerusalem in a significant prophecy as well in the New Testament, which we read about. In a few chapters before Luke 21, in Luke chapter 19, it actually says he wept over Jerusalem because he recognised the trauma and the persecution that would come against the Jewish people. And he made a little statement here. He says, your enemies will not leave a single stone in place. And we know that came to pass back in AD 70 when the Roman invasion came and just decimated the temple area. In fact, the prophecy of the Lord Jesus Christ is so accurate that you can go to Israel today, and we've been there and we've seen these stones here, and you think, well, that's just a heap of rubble. Well, no, it's more than a heap of rubble. That is the evidence there that Jesus Christ's prophecy came to pass. Because on this plaque here, you can read this little plaque, and it says the Roman invasions under Titus came, and they wanted to decimate the temple area, so much so that the soldiers, the warriors, pushed the stones over the edge of the foundation, and here they are as a pile of rubble. So again, you see, what we're looking at, whether it's through the survival of Israel or even what we might term archaeology, is the reality and the fulfilment of Bible prophecy, and it's very significant to us. But he added one little piece of information which we have here for us in verse 24, which again is incredibly significant. Verse 24 says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and will be led away captive to all nations. Well, we know that. That was from the Old Testament prophecies as well. But then he says this, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until those times are completed. So what we're talking about is 1967. And there's that little prophecy there. And there's that key word there, until. So 50 years ago, we actually saw for the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem being taken and controlled by the Jewish people. So, you know, we might live 50, and some of you are younger and you've probably never ever seen this, but this is the reality and the truth of Bible prophecy. The Jewish people for the first time in 2,000 years had control of the city of Jerusalem, and that was quite significant. They look at it from a military standpoint, and we certainly want to touch on that this afternoon, but we want to drill down a little bit deeper and see the fulfilment of Bible prophecy, how astounding that is, because that's the element that's interesting for us. So they call it the 6-day war. In actual fact, it was the 6-hour war. It was over, basically, when military analysts look back at those 6 days, they say it was over in 6 hours. It's quite astounding. And in a minute, I'll just play you a clip which we've seen before a couple of weeks ago with Mike, but I felt it was so good we need to look at it again. But you can recognise that the Jewish people were under a lot of stress. It was only 22 years after the events of the Holocaust, when Nazi Germany tried to exterminate. It's only 22 years after that. So they're a little bit worried that now the Arab nations, 4 major nations surrounding the Jewish people, were going to again attempt genocide. So, of course, they took a preemptive strike to protect themselves. Statistically, as we may have heard before, they were totally outnumbered. 465,000 enemy troops surrounding them versus 55,000 Israeli soldiers. 2,880 tanks versus 293. So the odds and the numbers were stacked against them. But in the end, it was one of the shortest wars in history. And as they say, 6 hours, it was over and done with. So I want to talk about 5 miracles. 5 miracles this afternoon. First one is the miracle of Operation Mockhead. They call it Operation Mockhead. It means, the English word is focus, Operation Focus. So the Jewish people obviously have always been prepared and sensitive to invasions and threats to their existence. So they've been practising for some time. They were able to turn around a jet in 7.5 minutes. So their Phantom jets from the French were able to turn around in 7.5 minutes. Now, normally a jet would run a bombing run or a fighting run once every 24 hours, maybe twice every 24 hours. By the time they looked at the mechanics and refueled them and refired them and everything. But they were turning them around in 7.5 minutes. So it was about 40 minutes down to Egypt and 40 minutes back. So within an hour, they could turn around. So they were operating at 5 times their normal strength, which is quite astounding. On June the 5th at 7:15 a.m, they sent up their whole Air Force, except for 12 planes. 200 left, flew out over the Mediterranean low, 20 metres above the ground at 800 kilometres an hour, so it's pretty fast. A little bit scary if there was a wind on that day, which there wasn't significantly. And they then sort of done their turnaround in the Mediterranean, came and decimated the Egyptian airports and their aircraft. Well, that's sort of astounding in itself, but we're looking at it from a biblical aspect to see the hand of God, and certainly the hand of God was in there. A couple of things. Jordanian radar operator saw a little bit of movement there in Israel, and he sent through a coded signal to the Egyptian headquarters. But of course they changed their protocols and frequency, so when the Egyptians got this message they couldn't decipher it, they had no idea. This fellow sort of looked at it and it was all gobbledygook to him, so he just screwed it up and threw it in the bin. So, you know, that was sort of one significant and interesting thing. There's three things. The second thing is the military commanders were actually flying into Sinai to have a meeting, and so they'd instructed all their anti-aircraft to not fire unless there was a direct command from themselves, because they were flying in an Egyptian aircraft and they were a little bit worried their own Egyptian forces would fire on them because, you know, might not have recognised who it was. So they said, hold all the anti-aircraft, do not fire anything. So that was interesting. The other third thing, as I said, was there was no wind on that particular day. So the Israelis had 99% accuracy with their bombs. So the wind drift was not a component, which, you know, quite interesting as well. So here's that little clip we've seen before.
Brings you the latest incident to upset the chancelleries of
the Muslim nations in the Middle East would not accept Israel's existence since its founding in 1948. They began amassing huge amounts of sophisticated weaponry and lobbying for the implementation of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against the Jewish state. On the 15th of May 1967, on Israel's Independence Day, a 3-week period began, which was one of the most tense and fearful periods in Israel's history. In direct contravention of international agreements, Egyptian leader Jamal Abdel Nasser removed the UN peacekeeping forces and began moving tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of tanks into what was the demilitarized Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. Egypt also blockaded the Straits of Tiran, an open international waterway which was essentially a declaration of war. Israel turned to the nations of the world, primarily to the United States, for assistance against Egyptian aggression, but somehow all Western countries decided to remain neutral. Very quickly it became apparent that the promises were all but forgotten. Israel, with 2.5 million Jews, was left alone to face the might of the Arab nations. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon formed a military alliance and began moving forces into Jordan towards Israel's borders. When the Arab countries realized that the world had abandoned Israel, many other Muslim countries were openly calling for the destruction of Israel. The will and means to murder millions of Jews were evident. Top IDF commanders expressed their concerns at the high price Israel was liable to pay in a war with the Arab world. Some military experts projected a toll between 20 and 100,000 lives. Israel prepared cemeteries all over the country, ready to accommodate many expected victims. Massive parks were prepared in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and other cities in case the cemeteries would have no more space. World governments, instead of defending Israel's right to exist, warned Israel continuously not to attack. However, the people of Israel had no choice but to go to war, to defend their country and their very existence. At 7:15 a.m. on June 5th, 1967, the IDF launched Operation Moked, Focus. Almost the entire Israeli Air Force was dispatched in a daring mission. Only 12 planes stayed behind. The risk of this operation was extraordinary, as the fighter pilots flew at an unprecedented low altitude of less than 20 meters above the ground. Egypt had the most advanced ground-air missile defense systems in the Middle East. Most of the Israeli jets were old and outdated French planes. If the Israeli jets would have been detected, many would have fallen, and Israel would have been left with practically no air force. And then, a miracle occurred. The most advanced Russian MiG jets that patrolled the airspace along the borders between Egypt and Israel were, for that one critical hour, grounded. Incredibly, at that very same time, the top commanders of Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq flew together to observe the Egyptian forces invading Sinai. The Egyptian officers had ordered all anti-aircraft units not to fire unless given a direct order as long as they were in flight. This created total confusion on the Egyptian ground as Israel struck exactly in that window of time. By 7:45 a.m., the high hand of Providence resulted in the Israeli Air Force reaching all the Egyptian airfields without even one plane being detected. More than 200 Egyptian planes, almost half of Egypt's fleets, were almost instantaneously destroyed, also bombing the runways and making impotent the mightiest air force in the Middle East. General Moti Hod, commander of the Air Force, said, "In my wildest dreams, I never would have conceived of such an incredible success." A second wave of Israeli jets were directed to Cairo to confront the remains of the Egyptian Air Force. And here, another miracle occurred, no less miraculous than the first. Even though Israel had lost the element of surprise and the anti-aircraft systems were operating with full capacity, Egypt was only able to hit one Israeli plane. The Israeli Air Force went on to destroy a total of more than 300 Egyptian planes, and every airfield in Egypt was neutralized. It was nothing less than a military miracle, seemingly impossible. And then, another miracle occurred. It was as if God hardened the heart of the Egyptian President Nasser, who continuously gloated about his glorious military victory over Israel. In the Arab media, President Nasser spoke of the end of Israel's air force and of the Egyptian tanks on their way to Jerusalem. Jordan, Syria, and Iraq believed these bombastic statements and wanted to join him in the great victory against the Jews. All the Arab air power struck simultaneously on multiple fronts. In almost any other scenario, Israel would not have been able to respond as quickly as it did. The timing was seemingly orchestrated to position Israeli jets exactly where they should be. Not in 6 days, but in 6 hours, the war was won.
A biblical prophecy comes to pass as the forces of Israel sweep on in an astonishing triumph of strategy. After achieving air supremacy, her forces thrust like an avenging sword at the very heart of Arab self-confidence.
And then, perhaps, the greatest miracle of all, a miracle Israel never expected: Jerusalem. Again, it seemed as though it was a divine appointment in time. Jerusalem was to be restored to the Jewish people after 2,000 years. The enemies of Israel had twice as many soldiers as we did, 3 times as many planes, 4 times as many tanks. The odds were stacked against us on every military front. The love of Israel, self-sacrifice, and courage of the Israeli soldiers, combined with divine guidance and assistance, made these miracles possible. Yitzhak Rabin, then the Minister of Defense, was given the honor of giving the war its name. He chose the 6-day war, recalling the 6 days of creation, as Israel too was created with the liberation of Jerusalem. As the center of gravity of the Jewish people has now returned to the land of our fathers, the Torah center of the world has once again returned to Jerusalem. The chief rabbinate of the State of Israel has established the 28th of Iyar, a day of Hallel and Hodayah, praise and thanks for the salvation of our people and the liberation and return of our capital, Jerusalem. Jews in Israel and in every country in which they reside come together in prayer and celebration. Similar to Hanukkah and Purim, it sometimes takes many years for the miracles to be fully recognized and celebrated. the Mizrahi World Movement is involved in massive community-wide celebrations across the globe, from London to Los Angeles, from Melbourne to Johannesburg to Chicago and Toronto. For 2,000 years, our hope never died. Our faith as a people never wavered. Wherever Jews were and whenever they prayed facing Jerusalem. Whatever happened the night before, whether it was the Crusades, the Inquisition, Muslim oppression, or Nazis in Germany, the next morning a Jew would wake up, dust himself off, put on his talit, face Jerusalem, and pray to come home, knowing somehow, some way, God would bring us back. This is our greatest celebration, to be alive in this generation where the prayers of our fathers and mothers have finally been answered, to be alive and to take part in Jewish destiny. To experience miracles of divine providence, Bayamim Hahem, Bazman Hazeh, like in those days, but in our time.
They step back and they look at this whole aspect of the Six-Day War and think, how did that all happen? Well, we know because the prophets decreed that God would be in control of this particular situation and bring about the fulfilment of those prophecies. Well, that was day one, June the 5th. But of course there are other operations that were occurring as well. The second one I want to talk about is the miracle of the Egyptian army defeat. So this was down in the Sinai area, and the Israelis, of course, were confronted by combined 2,800 tanks of the opposing force. But things went terribly wrong for that opposing force. There were three elements again that were quite miraculous about the Sinai battle. One was, of course, there was no counter-attack. The air forces were exhausted on that first day. And they were waiting now for a land counter-attack, which never ever happened because, they state, the Egyptian forces were incoherent and disorganised. And there are a couple of reasons why. The commander had organised a change in the routine, and he changed all the commanders and the officers a few days before. So now they were unaware in a way of the geography, the terrain, and the soldiers that were under their command. So that's why it was incoherent and disorganised. And not only that, again, the Egyptian officers had been, celebrating a meeting in the Delta up near Cairo, so that there wasn't one senior officer at his post when this attack began, the Six-Day War began. So, they're significant events as well. So the Israelis had to modify their tanks because they had old English Centurion tanks, and they had to modify them. They did that by extending the gun range and changing the tracks on the tanks so they could go through sand and in areas which the Egyptians would have thought couldn't have been passable. And that gave them a little bit of advantage. But as we say, behind the scenes there were miraculous things that occurred. I'm going to play another clip in a little while, but you'll see this picture here, which probably means not a lot, but this was the Mitla Pass. So the Israelis were given the command, the tank drivers said just head for the west, head for Egypt, do not stop. And so they did, and of course on the way they had amazing success, so much so the Egyptians just left all their hardware, their tanks, their weaponry on the side of the road and just ran for their lives. And actually, if we drill down on that photograph, you'd probably see lots of shoes where the Egyptian soldiers actually literally took everything off, their weaponry and their shoes, so they could actually run faster back to Egypt. So that's an astounding thing. And of course there was a cartoon that appeared, and I thought it was quite significant because underlying all this, of course, is the divine hand. And this cartoon said it's too risky, President Nasser. Maybe the Israelis are being supported by a force even more powerful than the Americans. And there's a historical viewpoint. Here's the Red Sea. Remember, Israel came out of Egypt. There's all the tank commanders. They're a little bit apprehensive to do the same thing because they're a little bit worried that there's a divine hand. And we know that there was. The other thing in this clip I'm going to play, it's a view of the Sinai campaign. The commander there says that he had an astounding victory because there was a dozen tanks, I think, that got to the Mitla Pass, and they were able to hold back a whole force of the Egyptians, which was quite astounding. But the second thing is, one of the commanders was driving the tanks at night time, and he had just a few tanks, and he came over the crest, and there was a whole raft of Egyptian forces and tanks there, and he didn't know what to do. So he said, I don't know what to do. I'll just flip my lights on and we'll go down and merge into the Egyptians and see what happens. And he did that, and when the sun came up the next morning, the Egyptians just all surrendered. So he said,
Sinai, June 6th. In a space of less than 36 hours, the Egyptian tank divisions are routed by the Israelis, and they flee the battlefield. One of their main routes of escape lies through the Mitla Pass, leading to the Suez Canal and the safety of Egypt beyond. But in a headlong dash, the Israeli 200th Brigade gets there first.
Sitting at the mouth of the Mitla Pass is a tiny little armored force, no more than a dozen Israeli tanks, led by Bren Edan.
I gave an order to the 200th Brigade to send a battalion quickly to the Mitle and block them.
He has basically taken as many tanks as he could, run south as fast as he could, and every time they began to run out of gas, he'd siphon it out of the tanks to keep as many as he could running to get down to the Mitla Pass with this tiny little force. And there they engage in one of the great feats of long-range gunnery of the modern world. Using their long-range gunnery skills to keep the Egyptians at bay, they keep an enormous force of Egyptians from getting through the Mitla Pass until additional reinforcements are finally able to come up hours later and seal off the Mitla altogether.
Israeli tankers press on through the Mitla Pass towards their ultimate prize beyond, the Suez Canal, and complete domination of the Sinai.
In the west side, what surprised me, that the Egyptian army was not in a situation of withdrawal. They just stopped their withdrawal there. I realized that I have a real enemy in front of me. I knew that from the terrain point of view, the maneuvering is going to be very difficult, so I must use something which is very fundamental in any war. This is surprise. I talked to all the tank commanders, and I told them, look, I'm going to do something which is unusual. With open lights, and we will go towards the Suez Canal. If we will face the enemy, we will shoot, we will fight. But it could be that the enemy will feel that it's Egyptian troop going, because otherwise they will not understand about the light. Just be ready with the guns to the right, to the left. The only one who will give you orders to shoot is myself. And we start moving, and it was quiet. Nothing happened. All of a sudden, when the sun came up, we were in the middle of a big deployment of armor and infantry, and it was a big surprise. I held the fire and said, don't shoot, because this army is a defeated army. I'm not going to start a massacre, because both sides will suffer. Once they raise their hand, we won the battle without even one single shot.
It has taken the Israelis just 3 days to destroy the Egyptian army and reach the Suez Canal. Their conquest of Sinai is absolute.
So you notice he says, I was quite amazed that we won the victory without firing a shot. Quite astounding. So that's June the 6th. June the 7th, of course, was the miracle of taking the old city. And as we've said, this is fulfillment of prophecy of the Lord Jesus Christ that he made 2,000 years before. Now, you've probably seen this particular shot here, which is a very famous and, I guess, a connecting moment in relation to 1967. And that was taken by David Rubinger, who became a very famous photographer. He actually had to take this from the ground, looking up at these paratroopers as they came in, just to capture all the emotion of that particular moment. In fact, sadly, he died in March this year, so he never got round to see the 50th celebration, but he became a very famous photographer. The interesting thing is, these three men celebrated 50 years of Jerusalem, and here's a little clip from...
כשהמפקד שלנו אמר, עולים לירושלים, בשבילי זה היה הדבר הכי קדוש בעולם.
We entered the Lions Gate, fight face to face. היה צריך ללכת קדימה, לנצח! We went down the stairs. In the right side, the Wailing Wall. All the Jewish history passed my mind. It was very exciting to participate in the liberation of the Kotel. David Rubinger, the photographer, took a picture, and the rest is history.
They look a little bit different than they did with paratroopers, obviously, not quite as fit as they used to be, but it captures a little bit the emotion for them. Coming to the Western Wall, for 2,000 years the Jewish people had never ever had control of that area. We read that this afternoon from Luke 21, so that's quite amazing. And of course we had enjoyed, when we went to Israel, a little bit of that atmosphere as well. We actually went to a place called Peace Park, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I do want to talk about this fourth miracle, is that Russia didn't get involved. And this is not a very well-known fact, but it actually was outlined to us on a particular occasion in 2015 when we visited, and also has been reinforced by a lot of, if you research on the internet Russia's involvement, it'll give you an indication that they were truly involved. So let me just talk about this particular time. That's not the Israeli Defence Forces there, that's a few of us on segways. We happened to be in Israel, and we had a very interesting guide who took us from a place called Peace Park. It's down the south of Jerusalem. And he took us to this particular lookout over Jerusalem. He said, I want to talk about the Six-Day War. And we all yawned and thought, well, we've heard 1,000 lectures on the Six-Day War. What new information is he going to tell us? Well, what he said is, I've got in my phone, he says, I've got the original recording of the commander on the Six-Day War, Motagur, who gave the command to take the old city. He said, I'm going to play it and I'm going to interpret it for you because it's in Hebrew. And so as we're standing there, we have this vista behind us of the city of Jerusalem from the south. On this side, on your right, was the Mount of Olives. There's the Kidron Valley. On the left was the city of Jerusalem. And he said, so there'd come a command. They were never going to get involved in taking the old city. General Dayan had restricted them just to certain areas. They weren't going to get involved in Jerusalem because they knew that would be a very sensitive operation. But around about 4 a.m. in the morning, Begin couldn't sleep. He had a lot of pressure. He was Chief of Staff. He couldn't sleep. He's listening to the BBC News on the radio, 4 a.m. And the BBC News said there's going to be a peace treaty put in place tomorrow, probably. And so he was thinking, once this peace treaty comes in, that locks down everything. We're locked. We've lost. So he phoned up Dayan at 4 a.m. in the morning. He said, we're going to take Jerusalem, take it. Who then gave the issue to Motagur, who was the commander on the Mount of Olives at the time. He says, go, take Jerusalem. And so they did at 6:15 a.m. Just a couple of hours later they started. Now the guide said this is totally unusual for Israelis. Normally we have strategies, we have plans. We go in, there's a purpose, and everyone knows what they're doing. He said, we had no plan. We had no plan at all. The command came, go take Jerusalem, and we said to the boys, the soldiers, paratroopers, 55th Brigade, go and take Jerusalem, however you can. And that was amazing to us, that particular little story. So he said, that was quite significant. And to us, it was significant because it reminded us of the time when King Ahasuerus couldn't sleep, remember, and he asked for something to read, and it was the life of Mordecai. and the whole history of the Jewish people changed because the king couldn't sleep. Well, it was almost a parallel there in that. And then he said the other thing is interesting. You'll know that there was a fifth party involved. Thinking, fifth party? And then he said Russia. We're thinking, wow, this is, interesting stuff. He said Russia had been feeding intelligence through to Egypt and agitating for them to make a move, hence the build-up of the Egyptian forces in Sinai and the removal of the United Nations. So that was quite astounding. Of course, again, there's been recent information that's come to light that the Russian power was certainly engaged in that. There's a book called Foxbats over Dimona. Dimona is the area where there's atomic research done by the Jews, who will neither confirm nor deny that they have atomic capabilities. But Russians were certainly involved, and they were going to instigate certain elements in that Six-Day War. The other thing that came out from my research, which is quite interesting, was there was an operation called Operation Samson. It was a doomsday operation. And as a deterrent, the Jewish people were going to detonate a nuclear device in Sinai if things didn't go their way. So this is research that's just come out. The commander who was in charge of all the weaponry had as an option, if things went against the Israeli people, they had 2 helicopters ready to go to Sinai, and they were going to detonate a nuclear reaction as a deterrent to the Egyptian forces, which was quite astounding and quite frightening. So that sort of information came out as well. So this miracle, of course, was quite amazing. And here's a little clip.
June 5th, 1967. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol sent a cable to President Lyndon Johnson informing war had begun. He wrote, Israel's existence and integrity have been endangered. He added a request, prevent the Soviet Union from exploiting and enlarging the conflict at Israel's greatest hour of danger.
What most people don't realize is that the actor that was perhaps the most dangerous, but operating sort of behind the scenes, was the Soviet Union.
Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg says, while Israel faced the combined might of Arab countries, it was the Soviet Union casting a giant shadow over the war.
Now, June 5th, 1967, the morning that Eshkol orders Israeli bombers into action, and they're successful, Soviet Premier Kosygin dials the hotline right into the White House and demands to talk to President Johnson. Now, the hotline was rarely used except in the most extreme crises. And the message that Kosygin sent heavily implied that if the United States didn't force Israel to back down, that the Soviets were going to take direct military action. And this took the conflict to an entirely different level.
President Johnson had told Eshkol the U.S. might cut off political and military assistance to Israel in case of a preemptive strike.
So the Israeli leadership was already taking a huge risk that Johnson would keep his word. Once the Soviets got involved, a dynamic changed. Suddenly, the Johnson White House saw the conflict not simply in terms of Israeli-Egyptian, Israeli-Syrian terms, but in U.S.-Soviet terms.
That led Johnson to send the Sixth Fleet steaming towards Israel as a show of support.
Would you say the fact that the Soviets never did get into the war part of the miracle of the Six-Day War?
I think it's one of the untold stories, or rarely told stories, of God's protection of Israel, is the fact that the Soviets seemed to come so close that they were threatening to the Americans, to the Israelis directly. They were promising their Arab allies that they were going to do more, and then they were actually moving military forces closer and closer to Israel.
Rosenberg also sees the war as a prophetic milestone.
The Bible does say that Jerusalem will come back under Jewish control, and it happened in June of 1967. The Bible says that Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, will be in Jewish hands. It's part of the biblical heartland. And God says he will restore the land, and he'll restore the people to the land. And I think that you also see God giving this land back to the Jewish people. Not because we deserve it, but because God had promised it.
The Six-Day War became a turning point for Jewish immigration to the land of Israel.
Throughout the Old Testament, God says that he's going to draw the Jewish people back to the land. But what's interesting is that at that moment, when Mordecai Gur, the Israeli general, was said on the radio, the Temple Mount is in our hands. When that was broadcast, not just through Israel, but worldwide, it electrified Jewish communities all over the planet. The level of aliyah, Jews leaving their exile countries and coming back to the land of their forefathers, skyrocketed in the years ahead.
Although Israel survived one of its darkest moments, Rosenberg says it still faces threats from the north, backed by a familiar interloper.
I see that the Russians are very actively moving into this region. They have made Iran their primary ally, and now they're working hand in glove with Iran to prop up Bashar al-Assad, who has slaughtered some 500,000 people in Syria. So you now have Russian forces, Iranian forces, helping Syrian forces just a few miles north of Israel.
50 years since the battle for Jerusalem, Rosenberg says Israel and its capital remain on the front lines.
Jerusalem was reunited 50 years ago, but the battle for Jerusalem remains. It's a political battle. It's an economic battle. There are people trying to isolate Israel politically around the world. Jerusalem is the flashpoint. Jerusalem is the epicenter. For 4,000 years, people have wanted this city, and they have fought hard to get it. And so the fact that Israel controls it today is biblical, it's prophetic, but it's also complicated. And we need to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and praying for Israel to be secure.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
So a couple of little interesting comments there. He says the battle for Jerusalem, of course, is an unfinished battle. It is still to be completed, but it's the epicentre of what the future is all about. And, of course, Bible prophecy proves that to be true. So the fifth miracle I want to share with you is all about the miracle of Bible prophecy, which has been really our underlying point of evidence. So that battle for Jerusalem hasn't been completed. When is it going to be finished? What's going to be its involvement? Well, a couple of little interesting points here. Of course, we're not going to go here to Daniel chapter 8, but the question is, on the background of the Temple Mount is in our hands, which was the cry of the Israeli paratroopers, back in Daniel chapter 8, there's a prophecy that uses the same terminology. Remember we read in Luke 21, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles? Here's the link back to Daniel chapter 8. How long is Jerusalem going to be trodden down? The answer comes for a period of 2,300 days. Not going to go into Bible prophecy, but on a day for a year principle, we add 2,300 to the time when that prophecy was given. And Daniel chapter 8 illustrates the overthrow of the Persians by the Greek power. And that was Alexander the Great at the Battle of Granicus in the month Deiesis, which mightn't be significant, but that's the month May, June. Okay, so we add 2,300 to that particular prophecy, we come to 1967. So there's some significant Bible prophecies that point to 1967 and the Six-Day War as an amazing time. Jesus Christ picked up on that, and we read that this afternoon. But you know what? Just about all of that's fulfilled apart from the return of Jesus Christ. So that's why we're right on the edge of, again, a significant time period. Jesus said they'll fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captives. You know in your Bible you can put a tick. That's been done. That was done back in AD 70 and beyond. Jerusalem will be trampled down underfoot by the Gentiles. We can put a tick against that because that happened as well. There'll be signs in the sun, moon and the stars. So in the political spheres, there's a complete destabilisation. We've seen that right through today's world. We've seen that in Europe and also in America with the fragility of the political system. Mr. Trump now in power. How fragile is that particular state? On the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. You know, you can't walk down a main street in London without being a little bit apprehensive that you're going to get hit by a van driven by a terrorist, because that's where the world is. You can't even be safe. In fact, Australians died in that last incident. Australians in London walking down a main street killed by terrorists in a van. Shocking. So on the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. So we're seeing tsunamis happen across Europe. Remember the Syrian refugee crisis? 1 million refugees have entered into Europe. What's going to be the outcome of that? The sea and the waves roaring. Theresa May thought in the political sphere she had confidence that she would increase her power. Well, no, the vote happened and there's been a withdrawal. So people are like the sea and the waves. There's inconsistency. And again, people fainting with fear and foreboding what's coming on the world. So, you know, in your Bible, you can tick all that. This is the only one that's left to be fulfilled. In the prophecy of our Lord Jesus Christ, they will see Jesus coming in power and great glory. So what about the future of the city of Jerusalem? Well, Zechariah talks about it in Zechariah chapter 12, and he says it's going to be a big problem. It's going to be a big problem for all nations. People are going to try and solve it. It'll be unsolvable, and it will remain that way until the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. Zechariah 14 goes on to focus on Jerusalem and said it's actually going to be the epicentre of a major international world crisis and battle. So that's ahead. This is another prophecy about Jerusalem that hasn't yet been fulfilled. That will trigger, of course, the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, and then there'll be a whole new strategy in place, and the city of Jerusalem will become a city of peace from which the Lord Jesus Christ's teachings will emanate. So although it's a city of confusion and frustration, it eventually will be the very centre point of Christ's kingdom. I'm just going to whiz through some prophets. Jeremiah 3 and verse 17 says it's going to be the throne of the Lord. So it's going to become the centre of government. It's also going to become the centre of spiritual education. People have no idea about a spiritual dimension to their life, and they're confused about, well, what is right? So Jerusalem will become part of that as the law goes forth from Zion. It'll be the centre of blessings. It's not that now. It's a centre of anxiety and confusion. Isaiah 65 says Jerusalem will be a rejoicing. Well, it's never been that, or perhaps momentarily, temporarily in history for a few moments, such as David's reign. It'll be the centre of worship, says Zechariah. And again, Zechariah chapter 8 says it'll be a city of truth. Not only that, it'll be a city of safety. There are kids that are involved in Middle East conflict now, and sadly there are injuries that occur. Well, that won't happen anymore. Jesus is going to solve that, and he says the streets of Jerusalem will be full of boys and girls playing. That's a wonderful prophecy about Jerusalem. Joel says it will be the centre point where Christ will rule, and he will construct the house of prayer for all nations. So there will be a unifying worship for people, and it will be the city of restitution. John in the New Testament sees this new Jerusalem, and he talks about a world in which there is no more death, sorrow, crying or pain. So the people of Israel, an enigma? Is it solvable? Is there something unique? What's the lesson for us? Well, again, Jeremiah says, you know what, if you can stop the sun from coming up, you can stop the fulfilment of God's purpose. What we're seeing in 1967 and the events that are happening in the Middle East are the precursor of the return of the Lord Jesus Christ and the fulfilment of those promises. So what have we seen this afternoon? We've seen the existence of Israel. How powerful is that? It makes the Bible relevant. This isn't just a book of black and white words, some history from ancient times. This is a real, living unfolding of God's purpose. So it makes the Bible relevant. It also verifies God's existence and his reality, that he is working out his plan and purpose with nations. It gives us assurance that God's in control. You know, we don't have a gloomy picture of what the future is all about. We can have a joyous picture of the future because we know that God is going to be in control. It also guarantees God's promises for the future and provides hope for all mankind. So the 6-day war, an amazing miracle? No, more than a miracle, because it's undoubtedly and unquestionably the very evidence, the tangible evidence that God exists and that everything is on track for the fulfilment of his particular promise, not just, as the Jews have celebrated, the reunification of Jerusalem, but eventually the reunification of the world, the whole world, to the honour and glory of our amazing God. That's the lesson of 1967, the 6-day war, and the realities
On this
of
day,
the Bible.
both secular and religious soldiers shared in the grief and joy at the wall.
Hanan, I want to pray, but I don't know any prayers, so can you teach me one?
Just say the Shema. It's okay.
I've never heard of it.
All right. We'll say together. Take your right hand, put it on your eyes, and just repeat what I say. Shema Israel.
Shema Israel.
Adonai Eloheinu.
Adonai Eloheinu.
Adonai Echad.
Adonai Echad.
ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Blessed be the name of His glorious kingdom, forever